And so I will start the recording of the presentation. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone, to day 2 of the Citizen Science Conference, the 5th annual, as we have learned from recollection yesterday. I hope you had a wonderful day yesterday. I really enjoyed the talks, and I enjoyed the posters, and I enjoyed your interaction. So thank you so much, and I hope that you interact today as well. Since we're all together here on Zoom, you are going to be able to interact directly in this platform, which is why we did it. There's a chat button down at the bottom of your window, your Zoom window. It looks like a little voice bubble. Usually it's next to something called participants, and you can ask your questions there. You can also put them in Discord. I'll be trying to monitor it there as well. And I will, without further ado, actually be handing this over to the workshop participants. First, I want to introduce Thomas Vattakkaven. He is going to introduce the workshop to you and actually tell you a little bit about the background. So thank you so much, Thomas.
Shannon. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all enjoying the conference. So today we're going to be talking about the data and citizen science in India toolkit that we assembled. The intent here being to revisit the toolkit and discuss any areas that have undergone evolution since we kind of published it, and to gather your feedback and possibly incorporate that into the toolkit as we go along. So to start off, I'll just give you a brief background on how the toolkit came about. In 2020, when the Cit Sci conference was initiated, there was much discussion, and out of this discussion, two particularly important areas were highlighted. This included the importance of diversity and inclusion in citizen science, as well as citizen science data. And as a result, two working groups were formed to develop a toolkit for practitioners of citizen science projects. And we were part of that working group on citizen science data. And we went about identifying the major aspects related to data in citizen science, on which we felt that practitioners of citizen science should have clear procedures and policies, which would help them to make informed decisions about citizen science data. So this was our team. There was Balu, who works with the French Institute of Pondicherry. Myself, I'm with Strand Life Sciences and the India Biodiversity Portal. Priya, who works with wild canids, and Suneha, who was at the time working with Reflog and is an independent marine biologist. Geetha, of course, is one of the organizers of this conference, and she works with Season Watch and Nature Conservation Foundation. And Vijay, at that time, was affiliated with Florida Museum of Natural History, but is also the founder of Diversity India group. So just quickly to give you an overview of what the citizen science and data in India toolkit is about, I'll just quickly go through a summary of how we went about making this toolkit and what it entails in very brief pointers. I'm sure a lot of you would have gone through the toolkit always, but just as a reminder. So what we did was we surveyed the global practices and standards in citizen science across the world. And we went about identifying major aspects of data that we felt that required clear policies. And we described these various aspects of data in citizen science, and we evaluated the pros and cons of various approaches to addressing these aspects. And throughout this whole process, we kind of kept in mind the need for diversity, inclusion, and ethics in each section. So the structure that we followed was modeled upon the US Geological Survey high-level science data lifecycle model, which simply maps out the life cycle of the data into various phases, starting with the planning phase, an acquisition phase where data gathering happens, followed by processing that data, analyzing, preserving it, and publishing and sharing the outputs. So these are the various steps of the data life cycle. And there are some elements which cut across these life cycle phases, such as describing the metadata at each metadata of how the data was collected and about the data itself at every phase in that cuts across the phases. We call these cross-cutting elements, and managing the quality both before and after and during the collection phases, as well as backing up this data for posterity and security measures to be put in place. So that's how we constructed the toolkit. We've actually divided it into 3+1 section, where data concentrations before starting the citizen science project is mapped to the planning phase of the USGS data lifecycle model. The acquisition phase is mapped to data concentrations while implementing a citizen science project. And the remaining processes of processing the data, analyzing, preserving it, and publishing and share it have been mapped to this section on what do we do with the data collected by a citizen science project in the toolkit. And then we have a section on data policy, which is kind of cross-cutting across every element. So just to summarize these three sections, in the initial section, after defining what we mean by citizen science and how this toolkit applies to citizen science, we have gone into data considerations that need to be done before the project initiation, that is the planning phase. And we discuss how it's important to align the data collection methods with the goals of the project, because it could be a serious handicap if you do not align this appropriately, as you will not get the requisite data and data types that are required. We talk about biases that happen during data collection, and in this phase, we talk about how these various biases can be minimized in the planning stage itself through means such as volunteer training and the need to plan for that ahead of actually collecting the data. We also discussed data infrastructure, which is a very crucial aspect of the citizen science project. And one needs to spend time thinking about what kind of data infrastructure is required and how to scale this data as the collection process is initiated and participation begins, and that automatically leads to things like data structure, the ownership of the data, which is not often discussed. Who owns the data and how will it be shared? And if it's shared, how will it, how will credit be given and so on? These things need to be thought about even before you start the citizen science project. And we've listed down various things with data accessibility and how you need to consider if your data is going to be open or are there going to be closed elements to the data, and why it is preferable that data be made open source and accessible. Moving on to the implementation phase, we again emphasize the need for infrastructure. And in this section, we highlight how data infrastructure can enhance participation, make life easier for participants, how it needs to be, there needs to be things like easy user interfaces and UI mechanisms or backend mechanisms that actually validate the data as it's being collected in particular formats. Also, the need for languages, multilingual languages, especially in India, to encourage participation and what needs to be considered for that. We also talk about data and metadata standards. Again, this ensures data quality as well as data interoperability if data is collected in particular ways. And during the collection phase, there needs to be checks to ensure that the data is coming in as you expect. Data quality, of course, is a very important component where as the data is coming in, there needs to be means to validate the data either manually or through automated mechanisms such as AI or other scripts or uh, automated means. We also discuss licensing, where we describe the various types of licenses that can be applied to citizen science projects, what is available currently, such as Creative Commons licenses, the coverage of these licenses, and how it differs for databases versus data versus creative content such as media that are collected on behalf of users. Finally, the considerations that have to happen post data collection, such as sharing this data, how to ensure that the data is traceable, and such as by using persistent URLs or digital object identifiers, and how it's important to store it in trusted repositories which adhere to certain standards, and both for metadata as well as data, and how ensuring that you meet standards will also mean that the data is shareable. It's also aggregatable across different portals, different uh, data repositories, etc. The use of open formats and open licenses are highly recommended at this stage, and how data downloads need to be given with open licenses to ensure that it's reusable and of benefit to the larger public. We also discuss data attribution and how the contributors expect a certain level of credit, but at the same time, one should not burden the end user with very rigorous granular licenses that will make it difficult to actually reuse the data. Finally, we talk about data policy in citizen science, and here we cover a wide variety of things, starting with informed consent, where it is important to educate the contributors beforehand about how yeah, how their data will be used and what will be shared, etc. So policies need to be displayed very clearly on the website, both during sign up as well as later if it needs to be referred to, and it should cover things like terms of use, legal, data ownership, attribution, how attributions will be given, how access will be maintained, and how to cite the contributions, etc. We've also talked about legal policies, and this is one area which will require updation for sure, because things have moved on in this front since the toolkit has been published. It's been 2 years now, and there's a new bill that's been passed. We're yet to understand what the implications of this will be from the citizen science perspective, and we did try to get somebody, legal experts, to help with this, but it's not yet happened. Also, we talk about privacy policies, cookies, third-party access, international laws that need to be met, and finally, also about user privacy, both user privacy for individuals who are contributing, as well as privacy from the perspective of the species, and how to anonymize records, mass locations for endangered species, and so on. So that pretty much sums up the content of the citizen science in data toolkit. We were lucky to have this published in two different ways. There's, of course, the Citizen Science in India toolkit that is available on the Cit Sci website, which was the original intent, but we also published it in the form of a journal article in the Journal of Biodiversity Informatics, and that is also accessible openly. And both these are available in the QR codes below, and you can access it if you haven't already done so. Yeah, so that's a brief summary of the toolkit and what we've covered. So right now, I'll hand it over to Shannon, who will be moderating the session. Shannon?
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was fantastic. And I mean, what an amazing amount of work, and also really, really important, because this is a constant and growing discussion, which is why we're here today, is actually to discuss some of the outstanding questions that actually all of our experts here today also have themselves and want to discuss with you. So to take the next section, where actually we hope that our participants will also join the discussion, I want to introduce you to Vijay Barve, who will overview some of the current points. Vijay?
Yes. So some of the considerations and concerns that after the report was done, we were also talking about kind of what needs to be done next, or what more needs to be done. So we all know that there is a lot of information available on the formal, so to say, formal portals like India Biodiversity Portal when it comes to biodiversity. But also there is a lot of information on informal or involuntary kind of contributions and channels, is something like social media, like a lot of people post on Facebook and Flickr and Instagram. So there is always a question saying there is so much wealth of information available. Can we still use it for further research, or can we actually treat it as a citizen science data, and can we use it for tabulating it as data tables, use it in our maps and things like that? So that's the question of uh, also the ethics. The data is publicly available, but can we use it? If we want to use it, how do we how are we going to ensure the quality of the data? How are we going to make sure that it is fair use, and is also kind of, since it is not explicitly collected, can we use it? Can we use the images for anything more? So all these questions are there, and we would really like uh, feedback or input from participants on what do they feel. So like personally, I feel if the data is shared publicly, there should not be a problem in using the metadata. At least I don't want to use the images for anything else, but if I know that person X has observed a particular organism in a particular place on a particular date, I should be able to use it for any further research, is my personal view. And we are really happy to kind of learn from participants. What are your views? What do you think? What should be the restrictions? What you think is a fair use? So yeah.
So they can post questions in the chat. I've been actually putting
Yes.
chat there. Yeah, we have
Post
a
questions
question.
and comments.
Yeah, we have a comment from Nishan already. He says generally sometimes people don't know some species are endangered or at risk due to wildlife trade. So how can we ensure that such inputs, if there are any from the user, to know which species location is not revealed? Is that so? He's saying, is there any way for the user to know which species location is not revealed? So because they are endangered or at risk.
Right. So, I mean, if as we know, if it goes through a formal portal, the portals have mechanisms to kind of hide the information, or what we call spoof the location, so that precise location cannot be found. But as rightly pointed out, when people are anyway sharing it on Facebook, so it is difficult for everyone to know what species they are looking at. And it's not unusual that someone really strikes upon a very rare or endangered species and posts the information. So, I mean, I generally would recommend not to disclose very precise location. Just keep it at something like, in Indian context, just leave it as district level, so that it's sufficiently large enough unit that people are not able to really go find it. And then definitely, uh, if any researcher approaches you, and if you believe their credentials, then you can always share more information.
Thank you. Paul also has a comment. He said that, that social media wouldn't be considered citizen science because it's not contributing in any way to citizen science projects. It's just social media input.
That's right. So my take on it is they are not, in most cases, they are not sharing because they are not aware of the citizen science project. They have intentions of sharing the knowledge because otherwise they are not going to post it on social media. So what I tend to call it is involuntary citizen science more than like when you know that you are doing it for a purpose. No, I'm doing it, and by the way, someone can use it. And in such interactions, I have not yet met anyone who said, no, 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 don't use my data. If I approach them on Facebook saying, hey, this record looks really interesting, can I use it? So, yeah, why not? And by the nature, since it's shared publicly, it should be like people are going to read it and people are going to consume it in the way they would like to. So that's my take on it. But obviously, it's not strictly citizen science. I agree, according to the definition.
So, Mother has
if I may just.
Oh, please go ahead, Thomas. Yeah.
Right. So I think there's a couple of points that need to be highlighted here. One is that I mean, of course, the definition of citizen science, what is construed as citizen science, differs widely across, initiatives across people, and it's all the time evolving, right? From the beginning, where it actually was physical participation of scientists in collecting data, right? Now we've moved on to the digital era, and we are seeing so much change happening in the way data is being collected across platforms, across, in various social media, and now we're actually discussing social media in the context of citizen science. I think again, saying this is citizen science, this is not. I think we need to be a little bit careful there as to what is citizen science. Does the mere involvement of an individual in contributing data, knowingly or unknowingly, that ends up being used in science, does it still contribute to citizen science? Is a question that we need to consider. The other point that I wanted to make was also the fact that the portals like India Biodiversity Portal or iNaturalist, they work with a list of species which are considered endangered or threatened and so on. And therefore, when you submit a contribution of that species, it is automatically what we call as the geolocation is kind of buffered a little bit so that this precise location is not revealed. So that brings me to the point of why more and more people need to be to consider using established infrastructure that has gone through these steps in ensuring that data is in a particular way, it is safe, it is shareable, and that privacy is not given away both from the user contribution level as well as species level. And therefore, that's why you need to consider reusing certain infrastructure rather than creating this infrastructure again and again for individual projects.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So, Gautam, do you have a question or? Okay, so there's one point that was brought up in the chat for those of you who can't see the chat, which is what is the toolkit? Is it Madhur had this? Is it a set of tools or a set of guidelines? And Bala had responded that it's a guiding framework on how to manage data through its life cycle. So thank you for that, because that's a very important question. And Vijay has also addressed a question by Vikas Paul, which is how data can be filtered and authenticated when it's done through social media. And Vijay, you remarked that it's done on a case-by-case basis, looking at the photographed and then asking further questions as needed. So, all right, so we have a hand raised. Thank you for that. I was just going to mention that you can also do that if you want to ask the question orally. So Rishabh, please.
Hi, Sharon. Hello, Vijay. A very insightful session, I must say. A quick question that I had in terms of social media, and while it remains more of a marketing platform, the way I would see it, is there a chance to use some of these social media platforms to promote citizen science, one? And also, in terms of education, so in terms of providing learning and educational videos, so how do you see that spanning in terms of, using social media as an effective tool to, promote some of these citizen science initiatives and platforms that are well established already?
So to answer your first question, we have been using social media platforms for citizen science. We have several projects, several communities on Facebook, and one of the communities, Spider India, we actually extracted data from that. Researchers actually working on tabulating that data, and we have published a data set of about 15,000 records on GBIF. So now it's available as a data set for anyone to download and use, and it also shows up in a lot of searches. So that definitely can be used. Again, there are certain hurdles. Can the names be attributed to each record and things like that that we are still working out. Uh, the plan is to seek permission from the users who are willing to let their names and maybe ORC IDs attached to the records, do that, and remaining would be anonymized. We'll just say someone recorded this. So user 112 recorded this spider in this district, and that's where we will keep it. So yeah, that's how we are doing it. And definitely social media is very popular, and more people are using it for educational purposes. Like the current project that I work on, we have a very active presence on Instagram, and one of our videos went viral with like 1 million views, just talking about one crab or something. So that's increasingly being used for sure.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Sham also mentioned that this has actually spawned a new area of ecology with social media, which is informatic ecology. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to introduce the next question, which is going to be led by Balu. So Balu, if you can unmute yourself and turn on your video so that we can see you, and you can take it away with the next question.
Yeah, basically, my point is simple. I mean, we know that the citizen science community produces large amounts of data, and more we see that this data, particularly the images that are submitted by the members of citizen science community, is being used to train artificial intelligence systems, and to particularly for identifying species. So this is a very convenient feature that people find quite useful, but there are also social, technological, ethical, and legal questions that are associated with this practice. And a lot of this, I think some models are open, and the source code and parameters are not open, which are the three components of a machine learning system. So, I mean, how do we address this? I mean, because the data set is contributed by the citizen science community, should we also insist on, people to open up their training codes, parameters, source code, all this, so that anybody can kind of, access it, improve it, and contribute, make it, and enrich it? Or, I mean, without sharing models, like INAT does share its model, but we don't know what's going on behind that. So this is my basic question, particularly drawing from other disciplines which look at artificial intelligence systems in other domains, where people are talking about breaking open black boxes, and so in particularly in biodiversity and conservation in relation to citizen science contribution, how do we address this is my question.
So Bala, we have a question that actually came on the top, but I think it's actually relevant here too, which is about, and actually it's an issue with AI, because AI doesn't make a distinction where data is coming from. It's like, how do you deal with repetitive data, right? Where you have it on one platform, and then it's also something like on iNaturalist and eBird, and and yeah, how is that dealt with?
Absolutely no idea. Vijay, can you please help there?
Yeah, so Vijay commented, he actually said that it's a challenge, right? So the data reaches GBIF, and they're working on trying to create algorithms like using artificial intelligence to actually, deduplicate it. But it's and he thinks missing data is a bigger problem than having too much data.
Yeah. So if we have too much data, we can always filter out what we don't need. But if a record is missing, someone has seen it but not reported anywhere, we are not going to get that data anytime again. And with more information technology tools, removing duplicates is not a big problem. And GBIF has already started kind of listing potential duplicate records coming from multiple sources, because from India it has happened that a lot of people have posted both on India Biodiversity Portal and iNaturalist, and both are sending it to GBIF or something similar happens with eBird and iNaturalist. So, but we don't really have to worry too much about that. Things will be taken care.
And that goes back to the previous discussion also of collecting data from social media, because we collect from social media, but it's not taken as such, right? For instance, if you mentioned that the organism was observed in X location in Karnataka, that location would then have to be geocoded. And if you were submitting the same location, same observation also on INAT or India Biodiversity Portal, it has its own precision level for geocoding, which would mean that if you compare the two data sources, you'll get different points with different precision levels. Also, you might when you're submitting it for a scientific purpose, you will submit it with greater precision, hopefully, than if you're sharing it on social media and mentioning a location. So all these contribute to data quality, as well as issues such as duplication. And how do we duplicate? Because often when we aggregate from social media, we don't even know who the users are. Sometimes we only have a username, and even if there is a name, we can't contact the user to verify, to ask them if this is your account on India Biodiversity Portal or iNaturalist and so on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vijay and Thomas. Those are really important points. Back to you, though, Balu. Paul actually had a comment here, basically saying, the data is actually being used by a lot of these large social media conglomerates anyways, right? So they're also doing a lot of data scraping. So then does it matter in a way? So
yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But see, the unintended use of data, when we consciously, posting it to social media is one thing, but posting it to a particular citizen science platform is another thing, where the licenses are very clearly defined. And that leads us to, and let's say, for example, in September 2023, there was this discussion on an INAT platform, that somebody basically asked that INAT's data set is available on the Amazon Data Services program, which was used by Google Lens to train its own data models, and also Department of Defense's, some application. So, are we kind of, being naive about these license frameworks in a way? When we say, open data, open science paradigm, and how are we going to kind of prevent exactly like what these corporates are doing, and as Paul pointed out, so that's something fundamental that we have to think about.
Yeah, so Rishabh has like kind of a similar sort of comment that that platforms like iNaturalist maybe should open up information related to the location and availability of natural resources, because they could also be used for unethical purposes like poaching or smuggling or other things. So what's the view on data privacy on some of these bigger platforms, and does it pose any threats in the long run because it's then available to everyone? And Vijay mentioned that iNaturalist does try to take care not to show precise locations, and INAT and IBP are open for for suggestions. But I also want to mention, related to AI, there's a lot of different types of AI platforms out there, and there's several that don't have any sort of ethical restrictions right now. So you can ask, it's like a version of a chat GPT, and you can literally ask it anything. Which is very scary to me, but I mean, there is no blockage on those platforms. They're done in an open source way, and they just say, hey, we're just leaving this, you guys decide, kind of thing. So there's no responsibility on the case of the original programmers. So
what happens in software is basically, I mean, there is this open source concept, but there is also this free software concept, right? There are 4 essential freedoms of associated with software, and it has a viral clause. The license is called GPL and new public license, and that if you publish your code covered by that license, then any modifications resulting from that code base should also be made public, right? So that's called the viral clause, and that exists in software. But AI is a new animal in the thing. So it's probably time for us to kind of take a step back and relook at some of these policy frameworks, legal frameworks, and try and adopt it so that our data doesn't go in for any unintended use.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I mean, that's the problem, right? I mean, things are changing so fast. I think it's really difficult for decision makers at all levels to really sometimes keep up with this progression that's happening with this AI boom right now. So, but yeah, absolutely, as best we can, we need to keep track of it. Yeah, thank you, Bala, very much. I think I'm going to move on to the next question, but just so you know, both Vijay and Balu and Thomas are still here. They're not leaving, so you can continue to ask them questions, and there'll be time at the end as well. So I want to introduce Priya for this next discussion. So Priya, please, unmute and turn on your video.
Hi, so I'll be talking about another emerging consideration that we discussed at the data working group, and that was attrition rates in projects, in Cit Sci projects, and also dropout rates of contributors or participants to projects. Now, usually at conferences or talks, we discuss aspects of methodologies in Cit Sci. We look at data, inferences from data. We also talk about, various ethical considerations, but we often do not talk about failure rates in projects. And this is an important aspect to discuss because when you start with a Cit Sci project, you invest a lot of energy, time, effort, money in certain cases in designing this project. And once it's implemented, you also become custodian of data from participants, and not just data from them, but you're also custodian of their information, the information which is personal information of participants. So then the question is, what do you do with this data if tomorrow you decide not to continue with this project? So basically, we can look at it from 2 aspects. Why do Cit Sci projects, some of them, prematurely die out? And another is what happens, why do participants stop participating in projects? Now, there are various reasons that we can think of for this, but of course, I'd like to open this to the floor and have people put forth their potential reasons so that we can work around those and make sure that those mistakes are not made. Often, some of the ethical considerations or some of designing considerations which Thomas talked about, and then Vijay also touched upon with respect to the various things that you have to keep in mind at different stages of data cycle while designing a project, would help if you were to follow some of those steps. It would help to reduce the decline rates of these projects prematurely, or reduce the dropout rates of participants. However, some that I really wanted to highlight was, especially because now it's so easy to come up with a Cit Sci project, some of these points, some points that I thought I would discuss here quickly were, one is the choice of data platform that you use to establish a Cit Sci project. So do you want to have a standalone project which you establish and collect data through, or would you like to host your project on an existing larger data aggregator? Now, of course, if you use the latter option, then you're not as flexible with data ownership or how you acquire that data. However, with these larger data aggregators, they already have a lot of considerations, ethical considerations or privacy considerations or legal requirements for a country already in place. They already also have an existing user base, which means you can actually access that user base and get more information or have more participants in your project. Similarly, one has to keep in mind that at some point, if you decided not to continue with this project and you wanted to transfer all of this data to another portal, a larger aggregator of data or a global repository of data, using standardized protocols for data collection in the first place would allow for an easy transition. Again, at the same time, if you are a standalone project, how would you store this data in perpetuity? Because the idea behind Cit Sci is also to collect data and make sure that this data maximize its reuse and also make sure it remains in perpetuity. So how do you ensure that? Your project tomorrow you may decide to shut down your project. Then what do you do with this data? Do you just keep it in your computer and not share it with anyone? Is that ethical for you to do? So there are a lot of these questions that come up, and there are ways to mitigate attrition in projects and of participants, like I mentioned, and now one thing that is very important and that has been highlighted by several publications and existing projects is that motivation levels of participants are very important to keep a project going. And how do you ensure them? By clear communication beforehand about data usage, data privacy laws, data sharing, and at the same time, discussing some of these issues, which is failure rates at conferences and talks, and even publishing some of these, cases of failures of certain projects to ensure future success of other Cit Sci projects.
Yeah. And this is a problem with not just citizen science, but actually science in general, right? What to do with data. And because a lot of the data repositories that we have pretty high paywalls, which can be prohibitive to scientists who, are coming from, let's say, smaller places, or they can't afford it. I use something called Dryad for most of my ecological data, and that's quite expensive, actually. I mean, I can get a waiver sometimes, but so that's an issue, right? And ideally, you should have this in mind before you start the project, right?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Have this in mind. And also, it's been shown that even having retention of participants in a project actually ends up helping a project, because I think there have been some studies done where they've shown that with projects like, I think, Zoo Universe or one of those Cit Sci projects, they found that the top 10% contributors to that project were also contributing about 70 to 90% of the data for that Cit Sci project. So your top contributors are also people who you want to retain. Also, these are people who are familiar with the project as they spend more and more time. So they actually start providing you with better quality data. So you want to retain users, and you also want your project to stay for as long as possible. And if it's going to prematurely shut down, or you think you can only sustain this project for a certain period of time, having effective communication beforehand with participants is really important.
Yes, that's a really good point. And it kind of goes towards this ongoing discussion, just again, for those of you who can't read the Zoom chat, that's going about, making data accessible, right? That if, it's public data, it should be publicly available, right? If it's publicly funded, for sure, but also if it's gathered from the public, it should be publicly available with the ethical considerations that we just discussed before. So then you have to consider how you're going to do that before you start. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we are getting close to time, so I want to make sure that Geetha has a chance. So thank you so much, Priya, for discussing this point. This is actually a really, really essential point. And it's one that people often think about only after it happens, right? After the data is collected. So it's a really important point for our community to consider. And Geetha will take the next section.
Thanks, Shannon. I'll just want to maybe build a little bit on all the points that have been discussed till now. Citizen science projects have a lifespan. Some citizen science projects intended to be long-term may end abruptly, or they may be citizen science projects that are running over some amount of time and they've had the chance to evolve, which means that one cannot often foresee all the end users for the data that comes into citizen science projects. In such a case, you would, explicitly get consent of users and contributors right at the beginning that, your data is going to be used in XYZ fashion once it comes in. But let's say a citizen science project ends after 5 years and that data finds use in some other fashion than that was explicitly communicated to the contributors. How do we ensure that attribution to the original contributor is ethical again, and that they get the attribution that they deserve? This, in a sense, is analogous to the citizen science data case where, the data was collected with some intention, but it has some other end use now, which has come about. The other case is when, through the life cycle of a citizen science project itself, the project may evolve such that the data is finding multiple end uses. In such a case, I think it may be simpler to quickly communicate this to the contributors and get their consent explicitly at that stage of the citizen science project. So the question here is, how do we foresee all these end users that potentially citizen science data have? Secondly, how do we ensure that the people who have contributed the data get their, their fair attribution and benefits from the contribution of the data? So that is my last question for this workshop. And if people have any views.
I have a question and a point, and I mean, I'm dealing with this right now with the citizen science project that we have that's actually being run through WhatsApp. It can actually be sometimes difficult to contact people again once they contribute. Right. So even if you want to provide attribution or or communicate with them what's happening with the data, sometimes it can be really, really hard. We actually thought that WhatsApp would be the really easy way but I mean, there's been numbers that are changing and I can't, there's all sorts of things happening, and it can be really. So I mean, Geetha, how do we deal with that? Because this is I'm dealing with this as we speak. So.
Right. So I'll give you the example of Season Watch. Our, data end use kind of changed in the sense that we wanted to make the data more public so that people could directly access the data instead of going through us, to access the raw data. And thankfully, we have something called a registration. So we were able to track the people who had registered with Season Watch, and we contacted them through either the website or the app where they were registered. And they got a little pop-up message saying, are you okay with us sharing this data in this fashion? Actually, we added a license to the data, which was not available earlier. And many people consented to that. And we were then able to upload that data onto GBIF. and it's now the second largest data set from India. And that's thanks to people who, in retrospect, were able to give their consent for making the data open. But again, this, I think, is a slightly gray area right now, and we need more policy and legal inputs into how to get this done in the most ethical fashion. So yeah, we're a little bit working through it right now. So I don't know. Something like a WhatsApp or a Facebook is going to be even more difficult than something like a structured citizen science project to get people's consent.
Yeah, and it's such a difficult game, because on one hand we chose WhatsApp because it's so easy for people, right? So we wanted to reduce the barrier for participation, and it's also easy to communicate with people. So all that's great, but then you have these other problems, which is connecting with people and communicating later on. So yeah, this is such an important point. I think Geetha, can you take? Please, Thomas.
If I may just add,
yeah.
So there's a couple of concepts we need to also revisit at this point. So one is the fact that usually creative work is considered to be copyrightable, whereas data, in a general perspective, is considered to be more open and more shareable. It's not copyrightable. I mean, it's a collective human knowledge in a certain perspective, and so for data itself. The assumption, I mean, in order to facilitate open science, open sharing, and these principles, the data itself, in my perspective at least, or in my understanding, is more freely shareable. Whereas when you can't say that I saw, in my personal perspective, you can't say I saw this organism at this particular place and nobody else has a copyright. I mean, has the ability to be able to use that in any fashion. That's not copyrightable. You've merely observed something. Whereas if you take a photograph, that photograph is a creative process on which you have a claim, and therefore you need to, if you want, you can copyright it. So I mean that perspective thing comes in. But there's also a concept called grandfathering, where if you make a new law, then you tend to exclude the previous use cases of what that was intended for, and that's kind of shepherding the previous users into the new framework. And I think So, I mean, also getting consent individually from thousands to if not millions of users is almost an impossible task, and keeping track of who has contributed, who has consented and not. So generally the approach is to use that grandfathering approach, or minimally to say that, we are moving towards this direction and just informing users, which again falls into the perspective of informed consent for users, and saying that if you do not reply within a certain weeks, we are going to assume that you are okay with this. Of course, the opposite is also true. You can say, if you do not reply, I will exclude your data from this new use.
Thank you, Thomas. That was extremely informative and beneficial to everyone, including myself. So thank you so much for that input. Geetha, I think we should probably close. We're just running at the end time now. So maybe we can just go to the last slide.
Yes, sure. So the main purpose of this particular workshop was to actually update the data toolkit that we built 2 years ago. And I hope we've made a case for why this data toolkit needs updation and all the new considerations that have come up in terms of data over the past 2 years. So this is actually, I would like to end with an open invitation to discuss data in citizen science with all of you. You are welcome to please share your experiences, continue to share your insights and questions about this discussion that we just had. We also want to invite you to work with the data working group to build upon the data toolkit, which would involve some discussions in the future, which will require us to meet and explore challenges and opportunities together. And I hope that this collaborative effort of all of us together will help, understand the data in citizen science better and give it that direction that it needs right now. So I would like to end with this, and we'll share some contacts where you can write in to us if you want to volunteer to work on the modification of the data toolkit together. you can please write into us at those contact emails. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add? Thomas, Balu, Vijay, and Priya, please do add.
Yes, and we can continue the conversation on Discord, right? Just because we will close the Zoom soon doesn't mean the discussion concludes. I mean, this is literally an open discussion. As you heard from our awesome speakers today, I mean, they're grappling with these issues as well. And I think they would also welcome these discussions because it will help them to actually work through these issues that are currently, as they say, open issues in citizen science. So yes, thank you, Geetha. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Balu. Thank you, Vijay. And thank you, Priya, for being part of this workshop. It was awesome, actually. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for also letting me moderate it because it was really fun and educational for me as well. And thank you to all of our participants who joined. We're going to have just a couple of minutes break now, just a few minutes, because at 11 o'clock, we're going to start with the poster session, okay, for December 13th poster, okay? So you go to the channel 13th December poster, and you can see all the posters there, and please participate just like you did yesterday. It was fantastic, and I love this community for their participation rate. So thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers, and I'll see you on the poster session. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.